What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming at you live on a Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. There is plenty to talk about for another awesome episode. Oregon football is in the air. Football is in the air, and you can't ask for much more than that. Joining me on today's episode of the pod is ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how are we doing today?
So far, so good. It's bright and early, but we always have something to talk about, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is bright and early. Apologies for the last minute notice for the viewers, but tried to get it out there as quick as I could. You can always watch the live stream replayed, but we know that people love being here on the live stream. So appreciate those of you that are here. I'm sure more people will trickle in as we go on Justin's Twitter, JHopkinsSD, my Twitter at mtorresports, and then, of course, right here on the ScoopDuck YouTube channel. So if you guys are here, leave us a comment in the live chat and throw some questions our way. Ask some questions, and we'll try to get to them as best we can. But yeah, without further ado, Justin, let's kind of dive into the pod a little bit. We're going to be starting off today's discussion, maybe get some fall camp notes later, but Oregon's biggest games in 2024. I think that there's obviously a little extra layer of excitement with Oregon heading to the Big Ten Conference in 2024. You got 2 bye weeks, but some more travel, of course, on the schedule. So where do you want to start this thing off?
Yeah, I mean, I guess chronological order would be the way to go. But yeah, I mean, how exciting, right? Like I'm sitting here and it's like, okay. And the cool part is, I imagine other people can, empathize with this, but I've been talking to friends about games and which games we might go to and meeting up and getting tickets and stuff like that. So, kind of a cool story is that I'll be able to go to the Idaho game this year. I haven't made many of the season openers, but what we're efforting to do, and hopefully some Duck fans appreciate this, my grandma, not my kid's grandma, my grandma is 90 years old. And so she actually lived in Springfield for 30 plus years, right downtown Springfield. Anyways, she hasn't been to a game in, we'll call it 2 decades, because that's probably as close as it's been. And so we're going to surprise her and take her to the Idaho game. And, this is an effort. She can't walk super far. She can still walk, but I mean, stairs and stuff like that aren't going to be easy. So the cool part is I've been working with folks at the University of Oregon that, obviously do this all the time and help folks, with disabilities or have wheelchairs or whatever the case might be. And so, they've got it set up where, she can park in the handicap park and they'll come get her in a golf cart if she needs it, take her on up to her seat. She's got one of the ADA seats so she can, walk right in and she doesn't do any stairs or anything. So it'll be great. She'll still be sore, but yes, it's Idaho and they're going to beat the brakes off of them. But, it will be like, you have to imagine you're 90, you don't get out of the house as much. Taking her anywhere is, she's still like with it and all that and everything like that. But this is going to be obviously very tiring driving her up, going to the game. But I know that it will, she'll be, ear to ear grinning the whole time and should have all my kids there, plus some of their girlfriends and stuff like that. So that's just kind of something special for me. And I know that she will really appreciate that. So I'm looking forward to that probably more than anything, because more than likely this will be her, last chance to go to a Duck game in person. And she watches every week. My grandma, she texts me every week, hey, honey, what channel is the game on? What time is the game on? She'll text me usually every Thursday or Friday morning, like, hey, what time's the game on? Which channel? So she loves her Ducks and she loves to watch. So this will be big for her.
That'll be a really fun experience for you guys. I'm glad you're going to be able to do that. That reminds me a little bit of my mom, not my grandma. My mom texts me probably kind of same deal every week. Like, oh, what channel is the game on? When are they playing? Trying to tune in. And then of course, before Oregon landed on the Big Ten network, it was always a major effort to just watch the game. So we're sharing logins and trying to figure out all that business. So I think it's probably safe to say, Justin, you got an extra layer of excitement for that game, but maybe not one of the biggest games on Oregon's schedule. We were just talking about this the other day. let's stay in the state of Idaho and talk about Boise State as the Broncos come to town to play the Ducks on September 7th in Eugene. And that's a game that I think a lot of people maybe are overlooking a little bit because in this era of conference realignment and the Power 2, people are saying Power 4, but let's be real, it's Power 2. Boise State is kind of one that's lost in the shuffle a little bit, but they're consistently one of the best group of 5 teams, and they have a great coaching staff. They're always really well coached, and a little thing that makes it exciting, they have a former 5-star quarterback that's probably going to be their starter in USC transfer Malachi Nelson. I got to see him a bunch of times when he was in high school out here in SoCal at Los Alamitos. I think that obviously you look at the history of Oregon and Boise State, and I think that makes this one a little bit more exciting. I think they played last in the Las Vegas Bowl a couple of years ago when Troy Dye was still on the Ducks. That's the kind of the memory that jogs for me. But luckily for the Ducks, they have that one at home because Boise State and those fans, they always show up on that blue field and create a great environment. I think we expect Oregon to get that one done, but I think a relatively formidable challenge for the Ducks early on in the schedule.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad that one's in Eugene. Not that they couldn't win in Boise. It's just going to make it a lot easier to play in Eugene. And a couple things. I think, you've got a new coach at Boise State. Andy Avalos is obviously no longer there. And what you have to remember, okay, you're Oregon. You're the number 3 ranked team in the AP poll. Everybody knows you're supposed to be good. You're going to be good. You're loaded on both sides of the ball. So guess what that means? You're getting everyone's best shot every week. Okay, Idaho's gonna do the best they can to come up with some trickery, probably in the first quarter. Of course, the game will get away from them, and that's that. Boise State's probably talented enough to kind of hang in there. Like maybe the ball bounces their way. Maybe Oregon starts sluggish. Maybe they kind of catch Oregon off guard. And maybe at the end of the day, maybe that game is 40-27, right? I don't know. I'm just saying maybe it's 40-27, which isn't quite the shellacking everybody's predicting. I see everybody saying, 55-3. And so, dude, it's not going to be like that. It's not going to be like that. The thing I'll say is this, under no circumstances should Boise State win this game. But I think they have a much better shot than a lot of people imagine at keeping it closer than you think. And what I'll say about that is that's actually a great thing for Oregon, right? You'll win the game, you'll move on. Whether you win by 30 or you win by 10, you win the game. And 10 weeks later, when they're doing, the bowl games and all that stuff, nobody's going to remember that you beat Boise State by 10 or 15 points, as Boise State will probably be a top 25 team or top 20 team at that point anyways. What they'll remember is that you won the game, you beat a top 20, 25 opponent. And the best part is Dan Lanning will go in the locker room after that game and be like, boys, wake your asses up. We can't slip like that against really good teams. And so if that's the early wake-up call that Oregon gets and still wins the game, I'll take it.
And to that point, Justin, I don't think that we're going to learn very much about this Oregon team week 1 versus Idaho. But week 2, like you were saying, there's probably going to be some plays really, oh, dang, that, like Boise State just did that. Or, oh, my God, like what was Oregon thinking there? They weren't lined up right, or they had some sloppy penalties, or just some boneheaded plays. Early season stuff, but all of that to say, Boise State is typically a pretty quality team. So I think you'll have a better sense of where Oregon is really at the end of the week 2 game against the Broncos versus that week 1 game against the Vandals. So I think it'll be, like you said, a win for Oregon more than likely. We don't need to kind of belabor that point, but I think it'll be a very solid tune-up game. It won't be quite what Georgia was in 2022 to start off the Dan Lanning era, but then again, not really much is. So Boise State is one that I think catches both of our eyes early on in the season. We don't want to go through every game, Justin, because the title is the biggest games of the year. We obviously know that Ohio State is probably the next big one that we're all going to be talking about. Oregon State, that's the rivalry game. You can never, anything goes in a rivalry game, right? As the saying goes, that one's in Corvallis, but the rivalry game will be earlier on in the year instead of after Thanksgiving. So I don't know if you had any thoughts there before we kind of jump ahead to the potential game of the year with Ohio State, any of those games between now and then.
No, I totally did. Just look at the schedule. There's a lot of tests. They're all winnable tests, but again, Idaho is going to be a scrimmage. They're going to walk through it. They're not going to know. They're really not going to know who they are after that game. Boise State, you're going to have a better feel for who you are as a team. What if you're able to impose your will on both sides of the ball? If you're suspect in the secondary, all the questions that we might have. Oregon State, like I just said about Boise State, is going to come in and give you their best shot. They absolutely freaking hate Oregon right now for leaving for the Big Ten and leaving them, almost to die a slow death right now, which I feel bad saying because I do support the program. I don't want to see Oregon State go away by any means. I don't. But, I mean, they're in trouble. And so you know that you're going to go to Corvallis and you're going to have a hostile crowd. You're going to have a team that wants nothing more than to beat you, possibly hurt you, hurt some of your players. Not maliciously. I just mean they're going to come with some intent.
Punch you in the mouth.
Yeah, punch you in the mouth. That's a good way to say it. And then, you're going to hit the road for your first Big Ten game and play UCLA. New head coach. Chip Kelly's not there anymore. Yeah, the cupboard's pretty bare, but now you're on the road. Yes, you're on the road in Corvallis, but that doesn't really count. This is a real road game when you go to LA and play UCLA to open conference play. So just the way some of those things set up, every week becomes an important kind of a navigation, if you will. We know you got to win the games, but you're also, you might need some style points along the way at certain points.
Yeah, I like what you said about UCLA because I'm planning to go to that game. That one's going to be kind of pseudo in my backyard. Pasadena's a little bit of a hike, but anytime the Ducks come down to SoCal, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm going to be there. So really excited to cover that game for ScoopDuck in person in September. But I'm a little bit higher, I think, on UCLA than maybe some other folks are. Not in terms of this is going to be an awesome team in 2024. They're going to shock a lot of people, but it really does feel like there's a new energy around that program. Obviously, from a recruiting standpoint, we know that Chip Kelly didn't really like to recruit. And now we're seeing Deshaun Foster kind of take this approach of, hey, there's a lot of talent here in SoCal. Maybe I'm not going to be able to go up against the likes of Oregon and Alabama or even Texas A&M. Those are some of the big programs that have come into Southern California lately. But I can kind of get, I don't want to say they're scraps, but some quality players that are in my backyard. UCLA is recruiting right now how USC should be recruiting as far as emphasizing that local talent, because that's really, I think, what we saw Pete Carroll do in the heyday of the USC years. He really just kind of put that fence around USC and said, or around LA rather, we're getting the best guys here. And they're not doing that necessarily, but I love what we're seeing from Deshaun Foster and that staff. They're really attacking the recruiting trail. And I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm not sure what their quarterback is necessarily going to look like. That's obviously where this thing starts. You got some talented options with Ethan Garbers, Justin Martin, and then Chase Griffin, who was actually on UCLA's team the last time I think they played in Oregon a couple of years ago. And he kind of gave them a little bit, not of a scare, but he played some quality snaps for the Bruins. So I think UCLA is going to be an interesting test, like you said.
UCLA is recruiting like Oregon did 6, 7, 8 years ago. And what I mean by that is they went in and said, okay, look, we won't beat out USC for the top guys. We know that. We might compete with one every now and then, but our bread and butter is going to be really just soaking up those guys in that, 175 to 300 ranking range, kind of the 4 stars. And, you'd battle Washington for them, or you maybe would battle Arizona here and there and stuff. And that's what UCLA is doing. You can build a roster like that. I mean, you can build a winnable roster if you can get some of those pieces, develop them. And, then I would say you need to use the transfer portal, to kind of bolster things up there. But you're right. It doesn't happen overnight. You're not UCLA and say, okay, we're going to be a top 10 program overnight. Chip Kelly did not leave a lot in that cupboard, so they have some work to do. But I agree they'll be a formidable opponent for Oregon. I think we'll get a good test, and it's a road test because we know that so far Oregon hasn't been as good on the road as they are at home. So, that's kind of a nice break-in, I guess, if you will, to see how you perform on the road. And again, it should be a winnable game.
And I think that's a road game where you're a little bit more comfortable, right? You don't have to travel very far. You've played at the Rose Bowl a number of times. I don't think they've played at the Rose Bowl with Dan Lanning just yet, but obviously not a huge trip. So I think that's kind of what we have to say about UCLA. I think Michigan State's an interesting one. I don't want to talk about them too much. We know that that's another program that lost a lot of pieces, but Jonathan Smith comes in, and Aiden Childs is kind of the talk of the Spartans as the former Oregon State quarterback follows Jonathan Smith out to East Lansing. So let's get to the real game that everybody probably wants to hear about, that Ohio State game on October 12th. I'm looking at my flights as we speak. Need to book those like this weekend. But this is game of the year material, Justin, right? The Ohio State game with the Buckeyes coming to Eugene, the game that the Ducks wanted to get in 2020, but wildfires, COVID, wasn't going to happen. So now the Buckeyes come in, presumably led by Will Howard at quarterback, the Kansas State quarterback transfer. Ryan Day, not on the hot seat, but there's a lot of speculation around him, I guess, as far as just this program doesn't lose to Michigan. And if you're not beating Michigan, people are going to be asking questions. But Ohio State, absolutely loaded. We got a great game. The last time these two teams met in Columbus, I was there. One of my favorite games, probably my favorite game I've ever covered as far as Oregon goes. But these teams have a great chance to both be 5-0, undefeated coming into this game. And that's really going to determine, I think, what Oregon's going to be capable of, big picture, down the line in 2024.
Well, let me play, and I'm looking up something here to make my point. Let me play devil's advocate here. Do I think Ryan Day gets fired at the end of this year? Probably not, but I do believe that his seat is warm. And let's just think about this, okay? Assumptions. It's assumption time. You play Oregon on October 12th, and if you're Ohio State, you lose, right? Okay. Maybe you lose by 3, maybe you lose by 10. Who knows? Whatever. You lose the game, right? What if, in some way, you go about a month and a half later, the end of November, and you play Michigan, and you lose that game too? Okay, then you really start to look at, okay, maybe Ryan Day's seat does get a little bit warmer. They might be really good and beat everybody else along the way, and that's fine. But if you lose to Oregon, and you lose to Michigan, that might make things really interesting for Ohio State. And, the big knock there has been the lack of physicality from that program, from that team under Ryan Day's leadership. And to the point, we watched Oregon with Mario Cristobal go in there and bully them around off the ball. Oregon absolutely bullied Ohio State off the ball. And that's what Michigan's been able to do with Jim Harbaugh. And while they've had world-class receivers, which we definitely know, and really good quarterback play, they still have yet to, kind of maybe get over the hump under Ryan Day. So, I don't know. It'd be crazy to me to fire Ryan Day, but also it's not unrealistic to think that, they could lose to Oregon and they could lose to Michigan, and then things would get really interesting there. As for this game, no doubt going to be one of probably the biggest atmospheres ever experienced in Autzen Stadium. I don't need to talk about ticket prices because anyone has seen that ticket prices are absolutely insane. There's no place to stay already in Eugene, whether it's a hotel or an Airbnb, unless you want to spend $600-700 a night for the Motel 6 Roach Coach Motel. It's unbelievable. You got to expect ESPN game days coming. I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't need to hype up this game. It's just going to be a fun one. I hope that we get the game that we're expecting, right? I hope that it's a back and forth game, and I hope that it comes down to a field goal or a last minute play, or something like USC Texas that we can all relate to. One of those just iconic games. I don't know. That's what I have to say. It's easily the biggest game of the year. I won't go on. Everybody knows that. We don't need to hype it up. And it's going to be really hard to wait till October 12th. I can tell you that.
One of the things that comes to mind, Justin, that I don't know I'll ever be able to get over when it comes to Oregon and Ohio State. Oregon went into Columbus and beat the Buckeyes with Anthony Brown. I can't believe that. They had a hell of a day on the ground, but still, just when you look at some of the other plays we've seen from Anthony Brown, they needed him to be relatively on that day, and he was. But now, 3 years later, you have a Heisman contender running the show. And that's not the case that Oregon found themselves in last year. And that kind of helps us transition to Scott's comment here, where he says, I think the Ohio State versus Oregon game comes down to who has better quarterback play that day. Your thoughts? Every other position group matches up, all down to which quarterback performs. And I would think that that's probably a pretty reasonable take, because we know that both teams are going to be monsters at the line of scrimmage. Ohio State's offensive line, I think, was a big point of criticism last year for the Buckeyes. And Oregon brought in Matt Bedford to kind of help shore up things along the offensive line. They have both of their bookend tackles back in the Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly. So I think they should be solid there. I think what this could potentially come down to, and it's related to quarterback play, how much is this Oregon secondary improved? Because even though they won that game against Ohio State 3 years ago, the last time they played, they got kind of torched in the passing game, and they put up a lot of yards. And that's really going to tell us where this secondary is at. Can Jabbar Muhammad go step for step with some of these other Ohio State wide receivers? And how is that depth if somebody gets dinged up or needs a spell? Is there any kind of a drop off? That's, I think, the game right now where we can really envision these transfers showing up in a big way and really kind of earning their keep, if you will. Like, hey, this is the game that we brought you in for. You know, we have two minutes left. We need a touchdown, or 2 minutes left. We need to stop. Go out there and show us why we brought you here. And I think that we're going to see some plays throughout that game like, oh, yeah, that's why Lanning and the Ducks went all in on the portal and took this uber aggressive approach, which I might add, Justin, Ohio State took as well. They brought in Chip Kelly to run that offense. They brought in Caleb Downs, Quinshawn Judkins. Both of these teams are about as all in as you're going to see.
Yeah, and I like Scott's point. It's definitely going to come down. Quarterback play is going to be a big part of it, right? Which quarterback can manage a game, I guess, if you will. I don't think either quarterback has to win the game on their own. I just think they need to manage a game. And so my bigger point, and it does relate to quarterback play, who wins the turnover battle? Like that right there, 100% is the game. I mean, can Oregon steal a possession? You know, can they make sure that they don't fumble the ball or throw an interception or whatever? Because I think turnovers are going to be the key factor there. And that's cliche to say, but I think you look at the way these teams are matched up, both should be able to run the ball. You know, both should be able to kind of sustain the line of scrimmage. At least you hope Oregon can, and they should. I think it's going to come down to, I mean, Will Howard's kind of the question mark, right? I mean, everybody feels pretty good about Dylan Gabriel. He's on almost every, early Heisman list, every quarterback list. I mean, he's on all the award watch lists. And Will Howard's just kind of like, okay, you get to be the guy at Ohio State. So we know Chip Kelly can do some great things with quarterbacks, as he's proven in the past and at Oregon. But, that's going to be a crazy environment. And will that rattle Will Howard at all? Again, I think this one comes down to turnovers.
Yeah, you got to win the turnover battle in basically any game, but really in a game like this especially. Before we go any further, want to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors here on the Ducks Dish podcast, and that is Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your guys' plans are for dinner, but head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try out their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Justin, we got about 10 more minutes, it looks like, on today's show. So we're not going to be able to get to necessarily every game, but I think the next one that pops out to me a little bit we can hit on is that Purdue game, which comes right after the Ohio State game. And we've got some comments here. This one's from Adam. Purdue could be interesting, though. They got quite a few transfers. Don't believe in Hudson Card. That's from Adam. And then Zome says Purdue is on a short week after OSU. And I think that's really where this one comes into play for me, Justin. I feel like it's a little cliche to call it a trap game. Maybe not cliche, but, basic. But I think it's a good point. And Oregon does have that short week because they play Purdue on a Friday. And I think that this is a game that kind of strikes me. All right, you're on the road. Landing teams have, in my opinion, they have shown up on the road better than the Cristobal teams have. If you're just comparing Landing to his predecessor, that's great. But win or lose, there's going to be some emotional highs and lows in that Ohio State game. And I think that I'm not predicting Oregon come out slow, but at the same time, it wouldn't really surprise me because that just with a game that big and then having to travel all the way across the country on a short week, you got to be on your P's and Q's.
I mean, so here's a Purdue. Yeah, I could kind of see it. Maybe they don't win in the fashion you'd expect, similar to Boise State, right? Maybe it's a 10-point win instead of a 28-point win, because that's the problem. Everybody assumes that Oregon is the number 3 team in the country and should beat everybody by 55 points. That's not how this is going to go. I mean, this is a better conference. These are better teams. That's not going to happen. If you're Oregon, you got one job, and it's basically to make sure you go 1-0 that week. It doesn't matter if you win by 1 point, 10 points, 20 points. You just want to win the damn game. So I hate that false expectation that we see, projected scores or whatever the betting line is, or, whatever Oregon should win by 15 points according to bettors or whatever. I don't care. Just win the damn game. So Purdue, you beat the game. Just because in the interest of time, I have this question, and we can answer it, or we can maybe get some feedback from our viewers.
Sure.
Which game do you view is bigger after that? November 2nd at Michigan or November 30th hosting Washington at home? I mean, Michigan's going to be the better of the two teams, but we both know what's at stake when Washington comes to town to Oregon. Playing in Ann Arbor, okay, that's going to be tough. I think they're going to be a little better than most of us expect. But you look at those two games and it's like, okay, pick which one you think is going to be the tougher game of those two. Kind of a toss-up for me.
I'm glad you posed that question, Justin, because I did want to try to get to at least one of those games. So now we can kind of tackle both of them here as we go on here in the show. Man, defending national champions and defending runner-ups. I mean, that can't happen very often that a team gets to play both of those teams in the same year on their conference schedule. But to your point, Michigan, I think, is a school that I'm coming around on them a little bit more, but I really want to see what they're going to be able to do at quarterback. We know they're going to be really formidable at the D-line, which Damon says here. Michigan game will be very interesting. Our D-line versus their O-line will be the matchup. We talked about Mason Graham on yesterday's podcast as he's a just monster in the trenches. So I think even though Michigan's expected to have some sort of drop-off, you got to believe that their fans are damn happy that game's in Michigan. And then for Washington, I think that Oregon fans could win that. They could win that game by 4 touchdowns, or they could win it by a point or an inch. Not that you can win by an inch, but you get my point here. They just want to win that game at absolutely all costs. And the fact that it comes at the end of the regular season schedule is pretty tough. But fortunately for the Ducks, they do have their second bye week that week before when they would normally play Oregon State after Thanksgiving. So I think that's something that goes in their favor. Jed Fish is a really good coach. I think we just have to call it like it is. I don't think that expectations are nearly as high at Washington as they are at Oregon, but he's turned around far worse off programs. Looking at Arizona, his last spot. So I'm not trying to hype up Washington, but similar and even more so to what I said about the Oregon State game, all bets are off when it comes to rivalry games, and Oregon fans want to win that game at all costs, as I bet the players do as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's Washington. They're going to come to Eugene ready to play. They're going to come with everything they've got. More than likely, Washington won't have the stakes on the line that Oregon will at that point in the season. Obviously, we're at the end of the season. Depending on how things fall for Oregon, you're, maybe looking to get into the Big Ten championship game. You're maybe looking to increase your bowl game, whatever the case might be. Washington's going to be in a little different boat, I would assume. And then Michigan becomes unique in the fact that, okay, maybe they're better than we expect. Like, everybody's hyping up Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten and then calling Michigan a notch below. I agree with that. But the thing is, what if Michigan, is able to make it a game against Oregon, and then they later on go on and beat Ohio State? Then you kind of have this weird, three-team race there at the end with Oregon, Ohio State, and Michigan. So, I don't know. I guess the good news is those games are later in the season. So the unknowns are Washington has Jed Fish. They no longer have like, 4 first-round wide receivers, and I'm exaggerating, but Washington had, elite offensive talent that Oregon was not matched up well for. That isn't there anymore. And now you've got Washington with a new head coach, and you've got Michigan with a new head coach, although he was interim coach for a couple games there. You got unknowns, and so it'll be nice to see maybe like somewhere late September or October, maybe get kind of a calibration for where those two teams are at, and then we can revisit this. But it's an interesting question to ask now because, Ann Arbor playing at Michigan, 100,000 people plus is going to be something. I think that's the difference for me is you're playing at Michigan and you get Washington at home. And I think that to me is the difference in why Michigan's the tougher of the two games.
You can never underestimate home field advantage. And I think that goes for just about any team in the Big Ten that's on that upper tier. And of course, we know how heated and intense these rivalry games get with the Ducks and the Huskies. But Justin, I know we got to get you out of here and get things rolling. So just wanted to get any final remarks for you before we sign off.
No, just hopefully when you guys hop on, I have no idea how many are on today. Maybe we're low on numbers, but
5:30.
Keep commenting, keep asking questions, keep popping in. Max will keep putting your stuff up there so we can see what you're saying. We want more of that. We want more interaction on the show. Don't just sit here and listen to us sound like two idiots all the time. Go ahead and say your piece as well. But thank you guys for the support again.
Absolutely love it when you guys show up, and getting to interact with the fans is one of the funnest parts of the job. But if you want to find more of that guy, Justin Hopkins, you can follow him on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on any social media platform at mtorresports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel as we continue to grow our community over here. And come see us at ScoopDuck.com for the best in Oregon football and recruiting. Subscribe today and share the show with your friends, family, and other Duck fans. But until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.